Here on the ground, change happens fast. Problems feel frequent and urgent. It's loud and anxiety runs high. From a satellite view, the Earth looks the same as it did thousands of years ago. We've been here before. Let's learn from our past and shoot for a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Satellite View. I'm Todd Mikkelson, your host. Last week, the show was shorter, and I did it earlier, so it was missing some news, and I also didn't do a historic deep dive because I took some time off and went to Washington, D.C. We met some friends there. I also got to hang out with my congressman, Dean Phillips. He took us on a really interesting behind-the-scenes stroll through the Capitol building, told us stories about his experience on January 6th. Absolutely astonishing, something that should never be forgotten. And I went for the first time through the Holocaust Museum. That, I mean, it should be a requirement that everybody has to go through the Holocaust Museum. Not only was the Holocaust just unimaginably mind-blowing, way worse than anybody has ever been taught in school or anything like that. Film footage that I've never seen. I'm into history. You know, you would think I would have seen some of this. It blew my mind. The whole thing was just way worse. It's unimaginable, and that's why the museum does it's a really good, well-put-together museum, probably the best I've ever seen. You have to be immersed in it to really understand how horrifying the whole thing was, especially now, going through it in the midst of what's going on now. Let's go into a deep dive here, a little bit of a historical deep dive. Now, this is stuff that people think they know, but we don't. It's happening, by the way, before us right now. For instance, Ron DeSantis supporters will go to the entrance of Disney World and heckle people going into Disney World in Florida. You know who else does that? Nazis. Republicans do that, and Nazis do that. After World War I, there were sanctions put on Germany. Germany, of course, started World War I. That was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And it maybe wasn't the best idea for Europe and the United States to put sanctions on Germany after World War I because it hurt the people more than anything. And people were getting pretty pissed off about it. Life was miserable in Germany in the 1920s and going into the 30s. I'm going to read actually from panels that are part of the Holocaust Museum. In all of this economic and political turmoil, Adolf Hitler rose to power. In the late 20s, his National Socialist German Workers' Party, that's the Nazis. It was the NSDAP, or the Nazi Party. It was widely discounted as a radical fringe group. But by 1932, the Nazi Party had become the largest political organization in Germany. What does that sound like? We all thought Trump was a joke, just like Germany thought Hitler was a joke. There was so much pressure on Paul von Hindenburg, the German president, he ended up appointing Hitler as chancellor on January 30th, 1933. He had become persuaded that in such a coalition, Hitler could be controlled. So Hitler assumed power under a guise of lawfulness that concealed his true intentions. Conservative politicians underestimated him. Left-wing politicians were equally naive. Neither took Hitler seriously until it was too late. If you remember the warnings before Trump became president, he would end up having the power to overturn Roe v. Wade. And a lot of us scoffed at that. They're like, no, he's not going to do that. He's an idiot. Well, he did. He did it. At first, the new government in Germany included only 3 Nazis, but then they used the fire on the Reichstag on February 27th, 1933. Hitler, as chancellor, then made a decree. He issued an emergency decree that allowed him to crush political opposition. This decree became the basis of the Nazi police state and would remain in effect until 1945. On March 23rd, a Nazi-dominated parliament voted to transfer all legislative powers to Hitler's cabinet. After this enabling act, the parliament would serve merely as a rubber stamp. Finally, all political organizations except the Nazi Party were banned on July 14th, 1933. 6 months after Hitler was appointed chancellor, the Nazis took over Germany. Violence and brutality were fundamental elements of Hitler's dictatorship. The people were in a place where they were brainwashed and decided, yeah, this guy's going to save us. And he slowly immersed them more and more into violence. Almost immediately after the takeover of power, Hitler's second-in-command, Hermann Göring, gave shoot-to-kill orders to police sent to quell communist demonstrators.
When the police are allowed to do their job, and that means, in some cases, shoot them, this will stop immediately. Very simply, if you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store. Shot.
On February 23, 1933, Göring enrolled Nazi stormtroopers and members of the SS, the elite guard of the Nazi Party, as auxiliary police, the Gestapo. If you remember, there was a test run of an American Gestapo in Portland. This is from July of 2020. In the early hours of Wednesday, after a night spent protesting at a place in Portland, two guys, Mark Pettibone and his friend Connor O'Shea, decided to head home. By 2 a.m., law enforcement hadn't used any tear gas, and with only a few exceptions, both the Portland, Oregon Police Bureau and federal law enforcement officers had stayed out of sight. A block west of Chapman Square, Pettibone and O'Shea bumped into a group warning them that people in camouflage were driving around the area in unmarked minivans, grabbing individuals off the street. They saw a minivan with guys in camo pull up in front of them. Federal law enforcement officers have been using unmarked vehicles to drive around downtown Portland and detain protesters since at least Tuesday. Personal accounts and multiple video posted online show the officers driving up to people, detaining individuals with no explanation about why they are being arrested, and driving off with them. The tactic appears to be another escalation in federal force deployed on Portland city streets as federal officials and President Trump have said they plan to quell nightly protests in Portland. In a statement, the U.S. Marshals Service declined to comment on the practice of using unmarked vehicles. Now, this is still back in July of 2020, speaking to NPR's All Things Considered on Friday. Homeland Security Acting Deputy Secretary Ken the Cooch Cuccinelli acknowledged that federal agents had used unmarked vehicles to pick up people in Portland, but said it was done to keep officers safe and away from crowds and to move detainees to a safe location for questioning. The Cooch goes on to say, the one instance I'm familiar with, they were believed they had identified someone who had assaulted officers or the federal building there, the courthouse. He doesn't speak very well, obviously. This is a direct quote. Upon questioning, they determined they did not have the right person, and that person was released. The Cooch goes on to say, I fully expect that as long as people continue to be violent and to destroy property, that we will attempt to identify those folks. We will pick them up in front of the courthouse. If we spot them elsewhere, we will pick them up elsewhere. And if we have a question about somebody's identity, like the first example I noted to you, after questioning determined it isn't someone of interest, then they get released. And that's standard law enforcement procedure. No, it is not. It is not standard law enforcement procedure. It is Gestapo Nazi tactics. It directly breaks the United States Constitution, Fourth Amendment, which reads as follows: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures should not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That's why you get read your rights when you're arrested, and you have to be told why you're being arrested. You don't get kidnapped into a minivan, taken somewhere that you don't know where it is, and questioned, and then determine whether or not you're guilty or innocent or should have been arrested. The Trump administration, with many people involved, orchestrated an experiment in Portland in 2020. It was a Gestapo experiment to see if they could get away with it and to see how the public would react, to see how media reacts. Do you even remember this? Why are we not talking about this? We barely talked about it when it happened. The media didn't ever use the kind of language I'm using. The Trump administration did a Gestapo act in Portland in 2020. You know who else does that? The Nazis. The Nazis did that. If you don't think that Trump has the same determinations as Hitler, then you're falling for it. In the spring of 1933, party officials and members of the Nazi Students Organization raided libraries and bookstores in 30 cities and towns across Germany. They removed truckloads of books and cast them into bonfires. On May 10th, more than 25,000 books were burned in Berlin alone. That's the Nazis in 1933. You know who else is doing that? The Republicans in the United States. You know why? Because they don't want kids to learn about things like the Holocaust. They don't want kids to learn things about the Nazis. You know why they don't want kids to learn things about the Nazis? Is because they are Nazis and they want to rule United States the same way Hitler did. Yes, I'm going there. Going to the Holocaust Museum is the one of the final straws for me. It's just, I'm so sick of this. It is just absolute to me. Nazi propaganda drew its power from the government's absolute control over the flow of information. All news media were censored by Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry. Freedom of speech was ruthlessly suppressed. Beginning on September 1st, 1939, Germans who listened to uncensored information on foreign radio broadcasts risked severe punishment. That's people not being allowed to listen to news. Our media has been for a long time in the hands of elitist corporations. Do you think if the Republicans took full control of our government, that those corporations would not go along with whatever the Republicans told them to do or not to do? MSNBC would be banned or forced to only do the same type of propaganda that Fox News does. Can you see that happening? I can. During the 1930s, the Nazis singled out various groups for persecution. Jews became their main target, but hundreds of thousands of others were oppressed as enemies of the state. The Nazis say the term enemies of the state. You know who else does? Republicans. Donald Trump. He calls the media enemies of the state. Communists, social democrats, trade unionists, liberals, and pacifists were arrested for their political views or activities. Right now, what the Republicans, the way they're talking about LGBTQ people is the same way the Nazis talked about the Jews and the communists, the liberals. How deep will they go if they gain power? The Nazis killed millions of people just for who they were. Gypsies, homosexuals. A woman, Helene Gotthold, she was a Jehovah's Witness, and for being a Jehovah's Witness, she was arrested and beheaded. That's what the Nazis did. I want to talk more about this when we come back. As you can tell, I'm pretty incensed about all this, and it's really going through the Holocaust Museum, reading the Nazis' maneuverings in the 1930s, even before the war. is just like, okay, this is happening here. If Trump somehow gets installed, because he's not going to get elected into the White House, if he somehow gets installed, we only need to look back at the 1930s and early 40s to see the future of the United States. We'll be right back. Satellite view. I'm Todd Mikkelson still. By the way, I'm speaking at you from Sunday, October 1st, 2023 in the Space and Time Continuum. Yesterday was the day that Kevin McCarthy finally gave in, let a continuing resolution get passed basically by the Democrats. Matt Gaetz says he's going to put forth a motion to vacate the speakership next week, probably on Monday. So Monday will be a fun day. Do you think that then he will nominate Donald Trump to be Speaker? I could run to be the Speaker of the House. You could too. So could Donald Trump. It's more poetic than coincidence that Donald Trump visited the gun shop in South Carolina where a white supremacist armed himself to mow down black people in Jacksonville, Florida. It harkens back to Ronald Reagan's decision to start his 1980 presidential campaign at the place in Mississippi where 3 civil rights workers had been murdered. There's always been racism. Trump's visit to that particular store wasn't a dog whistle. It was a call to act, much like his "stand back and stand by" command to the Proud Boys months before the violent attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Trump's celebration of gun culture was sandwiched between some stunning remarks. The first was an assault on the nation's outgoing Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, General Mark Milley, in which he ranted that a Milley phone call with Chinese brass while Trump was melting down after his 2020 election was an act so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death. Death. Trump also last week joked about Paul Pelosi almost getting killed by a crazy person with a hammer. Another crazy person with a gun just a few days ago in New Mexico. He was at something going on. I don't even know what it was, but somebody knocked off his red MAGA hat. Apparently there was a little bit of a disagreement going on. He pulled a gun out and just started shooting people. Luckily, he only hit one person, but when he was being interviewed by police afterwards, he was laughing and scoffing. Of course, he was a Republican Trump supporter. You know who else did stuff like that? The Nazis. The Nazis did stuff like that. The Nazis would shoot people and then laugh about it. In Germany, part of the extermination also included people with mental illness, people with physical disabilities, children. Sometimes they were in facilities, and nurses and doctors killed them. They'd poison them, they'd gas them, or they would starve them. These were people who were regular German citizens, supposedly at one point. How do you brainwash people into being monsters? There's 2 people you can ask: Donald Trump and Hitler. By the way, the gun that guy got from that gun shop, he decorated it with swastikas. And then Trump goes in that gun shop and takes pictures, smiling with the gun shop owner. He said, "I want to buy a Glock." Apparently, there's a Glock that, I don't know, has a picture of him on it now or something. Anyway, he's the leader of the Republican Party. He's been indicted 4 times. He's out on bail. If anyone else was out on bail under even one indictment and they walked into a gun shop, they would be arrested and put in prison. We are not taking care of our Hitler. Hitler was even thrown in prison once before he rose to power. Our Hitler has never gone to jail. Our Hitler is being praised by the Republican Party right now. You know who else praised a Hitler type of being? The Nazis. The Republicans and the Nazis. There's a new term, and we're just starting to figure it out. We began to figure out a little while ago that Republicans do not want democracy in the United States. They want a dictatorship. They are praising Vladimir Putin right now, and they're praising Donald Trump. A very interesting exchange. I heard this term last week. There was an absolute poop show that was called a debate, the Republican debate. When the debate was over, something surprising happened. A gaggle of the top anchors at MSNBC had a light bulb moment that they were trying to do political analysis when they are watching what they called the end of politics. That's when a movement that's lost the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections and is watching its anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ extremism alienate the next generation of voters, is determined to hold power by any means necessary. Rachel Maddow said, "What's happening in Republican politics right now is that the Republican Party, the Republican base, the Republican electorate has effectively decided that they don't really want to do politics anymore, and they're not all that interested in what politics is and governing and political campaigning and policy competition and all that stuff. They're not interested in that. So what do they want? They would prefer a strongman who is going to end politics. Someone like Hitler." Rachel's fellow panelists agreed that Democrats are struggling to understand this, but so is the mainstream media that they belong to. Another MSNBC pundit, Joy Reid, went on to say, "The media can't figure out how to do something other than conventional politics from the 90s. So they say, both sides, both sides, both sides. If we say Donald Trump is corrupt, well, we have to cover Hunter Biden equally. We have to even Steven it and find something to say. Let's stop doing that." Joe Biden is ringing the alarm. He did a very strong speech talking about protecting democracy in the United States. He's not afraid. He's the president of the United States, and he's not afraid to say Republicans do not want democracy in the United States. What is Trump saying he's going to do? He's saying, indict them all, indict them. I don't care what for. I don't figure out later. Indict them now and figure out what the crime is later. You think he's going to stop at Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton? The LGBT bald-head, I can't remember all the letters. They're ruining America. They're ruining sports. They shouldn't be in schools. In Germany, it led to what's called the final solution. They said, we're going to ship you east, and we have a really nice place for you there. They left out the part that there were gas chambers in those places. I do this podcast. You listen to this podcast. When will it come down to us? When do we get shipped to the east? People started saying an old saying. They started saying it back in 2015, 2016. First, they came after the homosexuals. I wasn't homosexual, so I didn't do anything. Then they came after the Jews. I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't do anything. Then they came after the gypsies. I wasn't a gypsy, so I did nothing. Now they're coming after me, and there's nobody left to do anything about it. Anyone that disagrees with Trump is telling us he wants them arrested. I disagree with Trump. If you're listening to this, you likely disagree with Trump. The brainwashing. So remember Pizzagate? Hillary Clinton had children in the basement of a pizza shop in Washington, D.C., and Democrats were using the baby's blood for different things. You remember when crazy conservative right-wing Republicans talked about that? And some are still talking about that? You know who else talked about that? The Nazis. Even after the war, 1946, there were false rumors spreading that the Jews intended to reclaim their lost property and that they were killing Christian children to obtain blood for rituals, the so-called blood libel. Do you see patterns going on here? Trump going into a gun shop where a celebrated Nazi had just bought a gun and mowed down people in a store. It's happening right in front of our eyes. Trump wants to order anyone who steals something from a store, the moment they leave the store, to be shot. He says if police do their job, which includes shooting people. You know who else did that? The Nazis. It's happening before our eyes. This particular episode of going back in history and comparing it to what's going on now is not a happy one. This wasn't a fun one. I only imitated Trump a little bit. By the way, I'm working on a Vivek Ramaswamy in this country. I'm working on an imitation of him. Next week, I swear we'll do something more fun than comparing Trump to Hitler and Republicans to Nazis. And I know people are afraid to compare Republicans to Nazis, and they're afraid to compare Trump to Hitler. People are saying that's just off limits. Why? You know who else would say something like that? German people in the 1930s. That's off limits. You can't talk about our leader like that. We have to compare Trump to Hitler, and we have to compare the Republicans to Nazis. Of course, you know, I'm not talking about all Republicans. I'm talking about Trumpers. I'm talking about MAGAs. And perhaps all Republicans are not MAGAs, although a lot of sensible Republicans have left the party because they know what's going on. So I will say, perhaps not all Republicans are MAGAs, but all MAGAs are Republicans. It starts smaller and it grows, like in Germany in the 1930s. And then all of a sudden it goes fast. If somehow the Republicans figure out how to install Trump into the White House, the United States will become the same as Nazi Germany. And all of us are at risk. You see the anti-Semitism going on right now in this country? The racism? Asian people will probably be one of the first targets. Trump is telling us his intentions. Why would we not listen to him? And why would we not point out the similarities between his intentions and Hitler's intentions? The similarities between MAGAs in Congress intentions and the Nazis' intentions. People have been brainwashed into being monsters in the United States. People just pull out a gun and kill. They kill children. They're monsters. They're not human beings anymore. They've been brainwashed into killing children, and they have no feeling about it. Another place in time that happened was 1930s Germany. We have to compare these things. I'm not afraid to say it. I'm not afraid to use the word Nazi and Hitler because it's right before us. It's right in front of us. So while recognizing the similarities between Donald Trump and Hitler and some of the Republican Party and the Nazis and Trump followers as citizens who end up going along with what the Nazis did, while recognizing the similarities, I'm going to point out now the differences. America's not in a horrible economic place right now. Our economy is doing really great. Of course, there are people who are still not doing well, and that's a whole nother subject matter. But if you remember the very beginning here, after World War I, Germany was decimated. I mean, nobody was doing well in Germany. The whole world sanctioned Germany for their part in World War I. And on top of that, then the Depression began. The worldwide depression began in the early 30s. That's not happening here. So people aren't that freaked out and pissed off at everything the way the Germans must have been. Regular German citizens. So frustrating. Your life is horrible. And Hitler comes in and says, hey, I'm going to point out who's to blame. And I'm going to save you. And people followed him. Big difference here in America now and Germany in the 1930s as far as that goes. Another big difference is Hitler was not an addle-minded, dementia-ridden buffoon. So he was able to get a lot more people behind him. The whole style of the Nazis was a big thing that got people excited. Hitler rallies. Trump tried to do the same thing back when he ran for president in the early days, and he's still trying to do the same thing, but he can't fill a 500-seat auditorium anymore. And every time he speaks, people fall asleep. His own followers aren't into it anymore. And he's obviously like, when I beat Obama in 2016, okay, what? He said that, this last week. He's losing it. He is losing it. Also, Hitler was not currently indicted and had 91 counts against him. Hitler had not already been in power and then lost an election overwhelmingly. And the people and the times are completely different. We have Gen Z. You've heard me talk about it a million times on this show if you listen. Gen Z is not going to fall for any Trump/Hitler BS. Gen Z is showing up at all of these elections and overwhelmingly beating down on the fascist, Nazi-like crap that the Republicans are trying to do, trying to pass laws to kill women who are pregnant, to kill young girls who are impregnated by their uncle, things like that. Gen Z's not falling for any of that. And the main thing, as we have seen over this last week, James Comer and Gymnasium Jordan trying to do their impeachment hearings of Joe Biden. Absolute disaster. They had their own witnesses admit that they had nothing. Here's AOC asking a question of the Republican witnesses at the first impeachment inquiry hearing this last week.
Mr. Turley, I have a simple question for you. In your testimony today, are you presenting any firsthand witness account of crimes committed by the President of the United States?
No, I'm not.
No, you are not. Ms. O'Connor, you are the second Republican witness here today. Have you, in your testimony, presented any firsthand witness account of crimes committed by the President of the United States?
I have not.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Dubinsky, as the third and final Republican witness in this hearing, have you, in your testimony, presented any firsthand witness account of crimes committed by the President of the United States?
I have not.
Even Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka, even those guys were criticizing James Comer. Even those guys, Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka, were criticizing the Republicans in this hearing, criticizing their choice of having these witnesses that did nothing. They were even admiring how the Democrats completely turned the trial around and kept pointing out, do you think that President Biden might be influenced because he's got all these towers in all these other countries? Do you think he might have political influence by those other countries because he's got the Biden towers? This was actually part of the hearing. A Democrat was asking things like that. And the witness said, well, I think you might be talking about the Trump towers in a bunch of different countries. Oh, hey, when Hunter Biden worked in the White House. No. Oh, you must be talking about Jared Kushner. The Democrats just completely turned it around. Republicans were leaving the room. The members of the committee were leaving the room because they were so embarrassed as to what was going on. So they don't have the brain power that the Nazis had. And the Nazis were doing it in a time where it hadn't been done before. And now people like me are pointing out, hey, you see what these guys are doing? It's just like what the Nazis did. So a big difference, many differences. The Republicans in their quote-unquote debate last Wednesday. It was an absolute sham. And then yesterday, Saturday, the government shutdown hearing, or not hearing, on the floor. The Democrats completely won that whole battle as well. They made the Republicans do what the Democrats wanted them to do. So the Republicans are just losing over and over and over again. So now Matt Gaetz has been on a bunch of Sunday morning TV shows saying, oh, I'm going to pass a motion to vacate probably on Monday. It's chaos. They can't pull off what the Nazis pulled off. They can't brainwash an entire 80% of a country to look the other way while they kill people that they want to kill, like the Nazis did. They can't do it. Well, yes, I think we need to understand that Trump is telling us what he's going to do, and it's basically exactly what Hitler did. He's not going to be able to do it. He's never going to be in the White House again. He's probably going to be in prison. Right now, there's a hearing on October 16th because he broke his agreement to not be in jail before his trial. He broke his agreement in many different ways, and now Jack Smith is putting the hammer down. It's got to go through all the formalities, although it wouldn't if it were me or you or anyone else who did the things Trump did while out on bail. We'd be in prison by now. But Judge Chunkin is having a hearing on the 16th. She's probably going to completely gag Trump. She's going to say, okay, you know what? You keep doing this. You cannot talk about this and you cannot talk about that or else. And then when he breaks that agreement, they might put him in jail. They might put him in jail. That's what this is about. That's what's going on October 16th. It's the beginning of that. Hitler was not in that position. So Trump will never be in the White House again. Republicans are just going to be decimated in this next election, thanks to Gen Z and all us sensible Americans. To make you feel better after all of this really solemn nastiness, which, again, the Holocaust Museum, wow, it puts you in a different place. It really makes you realize things. And that's why I was doing this show this way, because I was just through the Holocaust Museum for my first time. Very impactful. Now I'm telling you why. Okay, yeah, Trump is our Hitler. The Maggots are our Nazis. But neither Trump or the Maggots have any kind of know-how or integrity or anything that the Nazis or Hitler had. So there really is not going to be Nazi Germany in the United States. Of course, I hope you knew that throughout my whole talk, but it is astonishing going through the Holocaust Museum and seeing the similarities between what the Nazis and Hitler was saying compared to what the Maggots and Trump is saying now. But it is a different time. Gen Z, I swear to God, I see in my daughter Eve, who's 20 years old, part of Gen Z, I see an evolution in the human species between my generation and her generation. That's another huge difference from the 1930s to the 2020s. And she can vote now. And all of her friends can vote. And Victor Xi can vote. Gen Z is a very powerful deterrent to what I'm talking about here with the Maggots being like the Nazis. I just want to say that we should not be afraid to compare them to the Nazis, and we should not be afraid to compare Trump to Hitler. But still, they are not a threat to us, and they will not be a threat to us. I don't know what their plans are, but if it's anything like their impeachment of Biden, it's got no legs. It's got no legs to stand on. It's got no legs to walk with. Thanks so much for listening. I know this was a tough one. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope you listen next week when we will make it more fun. I'll keep working on my Vivek Ramaswamy. We love to say his name. We love to do Vamble Sloppy. Vivek Ramaswamy in this country. Yeah, that wasn't good. I'll keep working on it. Hopefully I'll pull it out next week. Think of something to say about him. The Democrats won huge this week. The GOP's original continuing resolution included criminalizing women's health care, by the way, something the Nazis would do. But the continuing resolution that actually got voted in on yesterday, does not include that. Does not include any of their Naziness. Oh, that's a new phrase. Naziness. Wow, what Naziness? Is that a title for this week? I don't know. We'll see. I'm thinking out loud, which I shouldn't do. My apologies. Again, Todd Mikkelson for A Satellite View. We'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to A Satellite View with Todd Mikkelson. Go to toddmikkelson.com for links and more information.